We will kick off the sessions with a keynote presentation by Professor Wang Linfa, Professor of Emerging Infectious Diseases at Duke-NUS Medical School, Singapore. Prof. Wang is one of the world's leading experts in zoonotic diseases, pet immunology, and pathogen discovery. His keynote topic for this morning is the science behind pandemics. Why are we now more at risk? Without further ado, let us warmly invite Professor Wang Linfa to the floor. Prof. Wang, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's a great pleasure to be able to speak at this very important conference. As the MC already said, I'm a scientist, so I'll be talking about science behind pandemics. So here is a brief outline, the topics I wish to touch. First of all, for the general public and audience, I just have to define what are zoonotic diseases and why are they relevant. Secondly, I will touch on the topic, are zoonotic diseases more prevalent now? And then there's a new area of research really brought up by COVID-19. So I will explain what is reverse zoonosis and why should we be worried about. And then I think for this conference and for the international community, everybody is asking, can we do better for the next pandemic? The next pandemic will happen. It's not if, it's only a when. And the World Health Organization has been working on to prepare for that, and we used to call it disease X before COVID-19. And COVID-19, as we know, the causative agent is SARS-CoV-2, and we just had a SARS-1 18 years ago. So are we ready for disease X or SARS-3? First of all, zoonosis. I think right now, in the terminology is being used quite frequently for emerging zoonotic diseases. So the strict definition of a zoonosis basically is a disease that transmits between different species. And most time we talk about zoonosis is we talk about disease that transmit from animals to humans, just like SARS, Ebola, COVID-19. But there is a possibility that we humans can also give the disease to animals, and hence the terminology called reverse zoonosis. Currently, for human infectious diseases, really, majority of them come from animals, so there's zoonosis. Especially for this class of disease we call emerging infectious diseases. The program at Duke-NUS that I'm working at right now is called the Program for Emerging Infectious Diseases. And for that class, then 75% of them are coming from animals. And zoonosis can really come from any infectious agent. And we know that they can be classified as virus, bacteria, parasites, fungi, and even prions. But for this talk, and also for the international community, we're most worried about are zoonotic viruses because they have the greatest potential to cause pandemics. So these are the examples of zoonotic virus from wildlife. On the left in blue are the more classic ones. We have been around for a long time. And on the right are the one we call emerging zoonotic viruses. And personally, I have been working in this field for the last 25 to 30 years. And certainly the frequency of emerging zoonoses are happening more regularly. And interestingly, that most of them coming from bats. So these are emerging bat-borne viruses. Hence I got the nickname as a Batman because my expertise is really dealing with zoonotic viruses of bat origin. So 1994 really marked the modern era of studying bat-borne zoonotic agent. We discovered this virus called Hendra virus. And then we had the Nipah virus in this region, closer to where I'm now. And we had a SARS, and we had a MERS in Middle East, and we had the Ebola virus, in West Africa, and now back to Asia, we have COVID-19. So this just illustrates, first of all, the frequency is increasing. Secondly, it can happen anywhere. So why we are seeing more zoonoses? So the drivers for emergencies are complex. They vary from virus to virus, but one thing is certain, they are largely human-induced. So I'm going to go through some examples of the recent major deadly zoonotic virus emergence. Start with this virus now most people are familiar with, we call them coronaviruses, right? So SARS-1 in 2002, 2003, and SARS-2 start from late 2019 and peaked in 2020. So the drivers for emergence are clear. Economic growth, desire for wildlife meat, and then live animal trading. For SARS-1, it's very clear that we know that bats harbors the ancestral virus, and civets plays a quite important role as the intermediate host before it transmits to human and followed by human-to-human transmission. For SARS-2, the origin and the early transmission event is still being investigated. But as a scientist who has worked in this field for 30 years, I'm pretty confident most likely it followed very similar route of emergence. Ebola virus in West Africa. Ebola virus is not new, but the outbreak in West Africa was much greater than the previous one. The major driver for the emergence is bushmeat trading. Hendra virus in Australia. Now, this is a different class virus. We call them paramyxoviruses viruses in the same family as the measles virus. With mumps virus, we're very used to these human kind of viral diseases. Over in Australia, the drivers for emergence are different from the previous ones. Obviously, there was no live animal trading, there's no bushmeat culture. But this is, I think, due to urbanization and, interestingly, climate change, because these are the bats love tropical kind of climate. So they used to be distributed at the top end of Queensland on the East Coast. But in the last 100 years, the reservoir species, the flying foxes, have moved down south all the way to Sydney. Just in 100 years, they have moved really 1,000 kilometers or more and made them much closer to the major population in Australia, hence the jump from bats to human. But it happened through an intermediate host. In this case, it's horses. Closer to where we are now in Southeast Asia, the Nipah virus. And so there are two scenarios of Nipah virus. One is in Bangladesh. So the Bangladesh, the virus was a direct jump from bats to humans. And the drivers for this is the traditional, consumption of date palm juice. They are collected freshly. Unfortunately, juice can be contaminated with bat urine, with live virus, so that human consume this can be infected. And that there's a cultural tradition, dealing with sick people and dead bodies, and that also really exacerbated the situation. The Nipah virus closer to us in Malaysia and some cases in Singapore, in 1998, 1999, was slightly different from the Nipah from Bangladesh. So in this case, the drivers for emergence are unusual farming practice and a forest fire. Bats are very sensitive to smoke. And when you have a forest fire, bats will travel long distance and they are stressed, and then their virus level goes up and the virus will jump. In this case, it's pigs involved and transmit to human eventually. So as you can see, it's a complicated scenario, and we have to really zoom in drivers that are unique to different viral outbreaks. So now the concept of reverse zoonosis, as I explained in the introduction, reverse zoonosis referring to human to animal transmission of an infectious agent. When we think of wildlife, on the left, I listed all the roles that a wildlife animal can play. They can be the natural reservoir, they can be the intermediate host that make an adaptation to jump to human. They can be the amplifying host, like the horses in Australia for the Hendra virus outbreak, that the virus did not change from bats to horses to human. The role of the intermediate host is just to amplify, get more virus. And then the terminology now is reverse zoonosis, or we call spill back. Spill over is animal to human, and spill back is human to animal. So now we're in a scenario, it's pretty kind of scary, because if reverse zoonosis happens, we will create this new class of reservoir. I call them the unnatural wildlife reservoir. We start with the natural reservoir. So on the right, I show you the diagram, really in discussion of the SARS-CoV-2, the causative agent of COVID-19. Although we still have question marks there, but I think most of the scientists will believe that the ancestral virus exists in bats and most likely in Asia. And it went through animal X. We still don't know which that animal is. Pangolin is one suspect, and civets can be the other. But then it transmits to human, and in Wuhan, that seafood market play a role. And then followed by massive human-to-human transmission, as we all know. But to our surprise is that this zoonotic virus, different from the previous one, is very easy to go from human to animals. Now, there are dozens of animals already proven can be infected by transmission from human, which I list here is really the most significant human to animal transmission are the minks. Initially start from the Europe and as being spread to other parts of the world. So these are reverse zoonosis, human to animal transmission. And the virus replicate and change, mutate in minks, and then they spill sort of over again, the second kind of zoonotic transmission from mink to humans. And this present a challenge because these viruses are now not the identical virus that human gave to mink. So this is bad news, but at least that happened with farmed animals. With farmed animals, it's really easier to contain and to eradicate. What we're worried about is the reverse zoonosis on the right column. What happens if humans give the virus to a novel host, like bats in American continent? Because bats in American continent are not the natural reservoir, but some of the bats will be susceptible. And my research area is on bat biology and bat immunology. Bats have a very unique immune system and they can sustain the virus without disease. But the virus can still mutate and go to animal X, Y, Z. So when that mutated virus goes through animal X, Y, Z and get to human, it could be that disease X, Y, Z or SARS-3. So there's really a very urgent need for us to make sure that kind of reverse zoonosis does not happen. Can we do better in prepare for the next pandemic? Now, we have ministers in this forum and the international community from WHO to MOHs of every nation. The key word right now, everybody is really working on is pandemic preparedness. But in reality, how can we prepare a pandemic that we don't know when and what? To me, there are 3 levels we can do. The first level is we call pre-emergence surveillance. So really look at animals and animal-human interface and looking for what's new and what the frequency is increasing. The second layer we can do is early warning. So I'm very pleased, in this forum, we're talking about, digital public health. The digital side of pandemic preparedness will play a very important role. I think we need to have data sharing and transparency, because unusual cases and events are happening every day in hospitals, in ICU units. Right now, the investigation is really fragmented and not really, in a network kind of scenario. So we think there's a lot room to improve, and today's conference and the rest of the discussion, hopefully, will point the direction how we can improve. And then if we fail at the early warning stage, like COVID-19, the virus will start to spread. Then the only other measure we have left is what we call countermeasures, basically therapeutics and the vaccines. This is our last resort. So up until now, we do this post-pandemic. So when you have a pandemic already, and then we really rush into it, try to develop vaccine and therapeutics. So the lessons for COVID-19 is that clear, that we need to do that before the pandemic. So this is what I term as a preemptive development. Of course, this will be costly. So the scientists need to work with, government agency, international agency, funding bodies to really do risk assessment and try to prepare these countermeasures before the next pandemic. Are we ready for SARS-3? So sorry for the really small sort of print on the screen, but this really gives you an idea of this coronavirus now everybody are very familiar with. So coronaviruses, just like any virus families, we give them names and we give them classification. So coronavirus is the same. We have 4 different subgroups we call genus. So it's alpha, beta, delta, and gamma. Alpha, beta are the only ones known to this virus infect human, but the zoonotic, more deadly coronavirus all come from this beta genus on the left. And then you have SARS-1, SARS-2, and the MERS coronaviruses. SARS-1 and SARS-2 forms a subgroup we call the viruses. So now I think the scientists working in this field all know these are the most dangerous virus because they use a human molecule called ACE2 as a receptor, and that makes this virus very transmissible. Most virus is deadly. I mean, it's bad, but the worst can be is that you have a very transmissible virus like the Delta variant we're dealing with right now. So scientists, like myself, we cannot see through the crystal balls, right? We cannot predict with 100% accuracy to say what's the next disease X. But most people agree that the next disease X or SARS-3 most likely will be another virus. And then unfortunately, for the main audience of this conference, the region we are in, the Southeast Asia, is a hotspot. And so with collaboration in the region that we have already data to demonstrate that. So this is a collaboration between scientists in Thailand and in Singapore. We published this. We found evidence of SARS-CoV-2 related virus is circulating in bats and pangolins in our region. This is another paper from Cambodia, discovered the similar findings. 2 weeks ago, a very important paper has appeared in a preprint form. Basically now, scientists in Laos has discovered a SARS-CoV-2-like virus, basically that it has the functional parts we call the receptor binding domain of that virus that can bind to human ACE2, and that part is identical to SARS-CoV-2. So we have a bat virus basically bearing a most important part of the virus, which is identical to the human SARS-CoV-2. So basically that virus is ready to jump to human. The only thing we don't know is when it will happen and whether it will be very transmissible and like SARS-2. If that happens, then we have SARS-3. So, this is just like the last, 16 to 18 months. And considering, most countries are in locking down, right? So the research activity is very limited. But even with limited activity in a very short period of time, we already discovered that, bats in this region, all the way from Japan to Zhejiang province, Yunnan province, to Laos, to Thailand, to Cambodia. And I'm sure that once the travel ban is lifted, if scientists can collaborate, and then I think we will find many, many of these viruses circulating in the bat population. So these are the kind of a very scary picture, but at the same time, we have hope. The coronavirus vaccine development, was really historical. In 8 months, from a totally novel pathogen to a vaccine, many different vaccines ready for human trial, and eventually now the whole world is benefit from mass vaccination. But as we all know that, the virus is racing, right? So that we have a vaccine on the left. I put the vaccine development in 5 different stages and 5 different generations, Just like the mobile phones, we have 1G to 6G, 5G, and the vaccines, we have 1G to 5G. So the first generation vaccine is the one that based on the original strain discovered from the outbreak in Wuhan. So most of us hopefully be vaccinated, and we all took this first generation vaccine. And then in the middle of this year, we realized that this vaccine is very good, but not good enough, because when you have variant like beta and delta, they don't protect as good. So now scientists and the commercial industry partners are racing to produce the second generation vaccine, and hopefully we protect the variants of concerns like beta and delta better. But the viruses keep evolving. So we already have data that if you have a delta vaccine today, if you immunize yourself, it's still not effective to prevent the known VOCs like beta. And then we know that future VOCs will still emerge. So my group and the collaborators in Singapore, we are trying to develop this third generation vaccine to cover all the viruses, SARS-1, SARS-2, and the virus we're already seeing, as I described, in the bats in different parts of the world, especially in our region. So these are the pan-sarbecovirus vaccines. And then internationally, scientists are still working, trying to go further to protect us against all beta coronavirus, or all coronavirus go to the 4th and the 5th generation. I mean, this is not a science, lecture, but I just want to share some very exciting data we just published in the top, prestige journal of New England Journal of Medicine. So this is a study we did with SARS-CoV-1 survivors. 18 years ago, we had a SARS-1, right? So Singapore was pretty badly hit. So from these SARS-1 survivors, when they took the SARS-2 vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, we found something really, really exciting. Basically, in their sort of bloodstream, we found this super immunity that, again, I don't want to go through, the data. On the left is SARS survivors, their immunity. In the open white box is the SARS-2 related virus, and in the shade area is SARS-1 related virus. And as you can see that, in the SARS-1 patients, COVID-19 patients, or vaccinated, that you have immunities against some virus, but not all the viruses. Until you come to the right column, that SARS survivors receive a Pfizer vaccine. Now you get saturating, basically, immunity against all the different sarbecovirus from SARS-1 to SARS-2 and the viruses circulating in pangolin bats. So we got really excited. What that says is that it gave us a novel idea and a strategy to produce this, what we call super immunity. So if you had a SARS and followed by SARS vaccine, then you produce the immunity I depict as the circle. The circle is the immunity against SARS virus. The triangle is the immunity against SARS-2 virus. So if you do boost, like we have already have a first generation vaccine, if we boost with second generation vaccine, you only increase the size of the triangle. What we want is these crosses. These are the immunity against different viruses, different variants, different subaqueous virus. So we think now we found a way of doing this. This is a prime boost strategy. So if you priming with the first or second generation COVID-19 vaccine, but now you boost with a third generation vaccine we call 3G COVAX, but use the sequence and the antigen from the clade-1, SARS-1 like, and then you will get this super immunity. So it's a very exciting idea, and we're working on this. Okay, so with that, I'd like to finish my talk. As a scientist, my talk today is the science behind the pandemics. Very clearly, science is very important, is the key to win the battle against future pandemics. But I want to finish the talk by emphasize that science alone is not enough. Just like COVID-19, has demonstrated that we really need other efforts than science, international collaboration, political will, and the legal framework really is important. And that has to be worked out during peacetime before the next outbreak. I'd like to really, highlight fighting pandemic disease X, very similar to fighting terrorists. So this is a very famous quote, the then Defense Secretary, USA, really described the difficulties facing with terrorists. You have the known knowns, you have the known unknowns, and you have the unknown unknowns. So exactly to fighting emerging zoonotic virus and next pandemic, we're facing exactly the same. We have the known knowns, we have the known unknowns, and our unknown unknowns. For that, international collaboration is very important. So I'm very, very pleased and honored to be able to speak at this forum, because that's the very good start to do the collaboration. So international collaboration is important, but equally important is the collaboration of different disciplines. COVID-19 taught us a lesson that, it's not just a human disease, it's not just animal disease. We need a policy, we need to work on the environment. So in this context, I'm very, very pleased to announce that we won the bid to host the 7th World One Health Congress in Singapore, November next year. So I hope all the participants will come and join the meeting. Last but not least, I'd like to take this opportunity to say that, international regional collaboration is very important. We needed a, scientist, politician, legal expert to work in this, but we also need a funding body. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank, Temasek Foundation. They have already lead the way by funding 2 important programs. One of them is a bilateral collaboration between scientists in Singapore and in Brunei. And I thank the Brunei Minister for Health and through the University of Brunei, EVYD, and the Duke-NUS, we are the 2 universities going to drive this collaboration. And then a broad collaboration just being set up, led by the Philippines and Singapore, and the DXD hub in Singapore is managing this. And the Temasek Foundation has already put a substantial funding to help facilitate that collaboration. And currently 6 ASEAN countries signed up, and we're working on the other 4. And this is really to do a vaccine follow-up, serving the serology, and try to advise public health policy in terms of immune longevity, vaccine booster, and how to prepare for SARS-3. And with that, I'd really like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the keynote address, Prof. Wang. We have collected a few questions for Prof. Wang. The first question is, urban cities are vulnerable to zoonosis as much as forested regions. Could you share what are some scientific and policy approaches that we should be concerned with, including reverse zoonosis?
Okay, yeah, so a very, very good question. I think that one thing is clear, right? Although we still are debating and investigating about the origin of SARS-CoV-2, in my mind, it's very clear that it's an animal has an involvement. So in terms of the role of animal plays, wildlife trading, that's a very, very tough area. Every time we have a zoonotic disease outbreak, whether it's SARS-1, Nipah, Hendra, and then even the Ebola virus, we always ask, how can we do it? I think so. Banning wildlife trading has been proposed, but most of the international experts thinking that this may not be feasible. So what we're thinking is that a better regulation, and also with the scientific tools now, is to do regular health check and to do surveillance. As I said, to prevent the pandemic, it has 3 levels. The first level is surveillance and the animal-human interface, and I think that may be the only practical way we can do it. For reverse zoonosis now, because as I said, most likely the reverse zoonosis will happen first with farm animals, and a low risk, but it's a very deadly consequence if it go to wildlife. So again, I think better regulation and active surveillance are the best tools we have right now.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. The second question is, what are your thoughts on twindemic and how will it influence the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic?
Wow, that's so social media definitely, plays a very important role. And like everything else, it's a double-edged sword, okay? So clearly, I always say that 17, 18 years ago, when we were fighting SARS-1, it's much easier because most of the discussion are semi-official or official. But now I think the social media took over, and definitely there were a lot of misinformation. And the sadly is even among our scientists, scientists become less stringent. They start to put personal opinion as scientific views, and then it's being used by others to say scientists who say this, so this has to be true. So I think that a lot of lesson to be learned. And I think that as a scientist, my only advice is that, for the general public that we cannot control, but among the scientific community, I think we have to be able to do better next time.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. The third question is, are there organizations or scientific communities working on predicting the next COVID-19 variant and the next pandemic?
Yes, without any doubt. We scientists working very hard on that, but to me is that the science are not ready. So I'm going to offending some of the scientists, some of the scientists thinking we're ready to predict, and that has been debated for the last decade. My personal opinion is that we can prepare and we can maybe rank the risk of different pathogens currently in circulation, but to predict precisely which variant will be the one to take over from Delta, or which virus, like I said SARS-3 most likely a subaqueous virus, but I cannot pinpoint down to which subaqueous virus will be SARS-3. So very honestly, as a scientist, have been working in this field for 30 years, all I can say is we're working very hard on that. We think that we're close to have a ranking, but we're still not ready to predict with precise kind of, information to say which one.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. The fourth question is, may we know the predictors for occurrence of reverse zoonosis?
That one is relatively easy. So the predictors for reverse zoonosis are 2. One is the transmissibility. So how frequently the virus can transmit among humans. because SARS-1 and SARS-2, these are, I call them close cousins. In scientific terminology, they're the same species, just like human, right? We have Chinese, we have Indian, we're the same species. So SARS-1 and SARS-2 are the same species of the SARS-related coronavirus. So they're very close. And yet, one virus is much more transmissible. And now among SARS-2s, we had the variants. Delta is much more transmissible than Alpha. So these are the predictors. The first of all is how transmissible the virus is among humans. Then the second predictor is we call the species tropism. So that's a scientific term. Basically means how many different species the virus can infect. And that we can do in laboratory to infect the cells from dogs, cats, pangolins, pigs, minks, or we can even do animal infection study in a biocontainment facility in an absolutely secure environment. So with these two data, we can rank the virus in terms of their risk of reverse zoonosis. So that part is once a virus is already circulating in human, we can do these kind of studies and to predict the likelihood of reverse zoonosis. So this part, I'm more confident than to predict a virus right now in the wildlife to say which one will be disease X or SARS-3.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. The fifth question is, what could we do to reduce reverse zoonosis?
Very easy to reduce human transmission. So as a scientist, as I said, I work with SARS-1 and now SARS-2, and I'm on multiple committees, nationally and internationally. I have to say, as a scientist working in this field, I'm a bit disappointed because for COVID-19, the explosive, human-to-human transmission in Wuhan, I was on the ground from January 14th to 18th in Wuhan. And I think that, we don't want to have a blame game, whose fault it is, but without any doubt, the mankind international community as a whole, we did not take that virus serious enough from January to March 2020. If we took this more seriously and we worked together with the political will, international collaboration, and the transparency, I think we could have prevented that massive transmission. And if we prevent a massive transmission from human to human, then we don't worry about reverse zoonosis.
Thank you, Prof. Wang. The sixth question is,
do we have a sixth question or that's it? It's coming.
Is Prof. Wang touched on coronavirus for future pandemics? But what about flu virus, the risk and the vaccine solutions?
Great question. Up until COVID-19, even after COVID-19, I have been into many of these, high-level summit, and they want us to see through the crystal balls to say, can you predict what's the disease X and what's the most at risk? I mean, even today, we're in the middle of COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. I think most scientists will agree the number one threat is still influenza. We used to debate about number two threat, whether it's a vector-borne arbovirus or bat-borne coronaviruses. I think after COVID-19, maybe most people leaning towards the second threat is bat-borne coronavirus. But number one threat remains to be an influenza virus. Now, in terms of vaccine development, so I have described today's context. We're trying very hard to have a vaccine that is a pan-sarbecovirus, pan-beta coronavirus, and pan-coronavirus. So for influenza, clearly, the dream vaccine is a pan-influenza virus. But scientists have been working in this field for the last 50, 100 years. I have to declare I don't personally work in that field, but I really respect the scientists working in that field. And whoever conquer that comes with a pan-flu vaccine, I think that deserves a Nobel Prize and will really, really benefit mankind greatly. So yes, flu is number one, and the dream is to have a pan-flu vaccine.
Thank you very much, Prof. Wang.